Welcome back, folks, to part 2 of my 3-part mini-series, Trump Extorts the World, Mark Carney Leads the Resistance. Just to make this crystal clear, today's video is not about that Canada has to abandon the US completely. It is about making Canada's sovereignty extortion safe. That's it, plain and simple. It means becoming an equal, not a subordinate. What we're going to do with it once it's achieved, well, that's for the next government to decide. So, yesterday we watched the arsonists light the fire. We saw Donald Trump break the world and demand a payoff just to survive. We saw the middle powers panic. Today we talk about the firefighter. Not the fake one, Trump. We talk about the real one, Mark Carney. Because while Trump is trying to burn the house down, Carney is not just stopping the blaze, he's building a brand new home just across the street. So here's the breakdown for today's video. First, the math. Why the US economy isn't as powerful as Trump thinks it is, and the numbers prove it. Second, the infrastructure. The massive ports and shipping routes Canada is building to bypass the US entirely. Third, the precedent. History proves that middle powers can fight back and win. And fourth, the marathon. Why this isn't a quick fix, unfortunately, but a 10 to 15-year mission. It's not about us anymore, it's about our children. It's about hope, it's about strategy. And it's about proving that the underdogs, the middle powers, actually have a fighting chance. Let's get one thing straight. The orange idiot assumes the US consumer market will be the center of the universe forever. He thinks he is holding all the cards. But the numbers tell a different story. According to the IMF, the US share of global GDP adjusted to PPP has shrunk to just 14.5%. Meanwhile, the combined economic footprint of the EU, UK, Japan, Australia, Canada, and other like-minded middle powers exceeds 35% of global output. Do you see the math here? The collective economy of the coalition of the middle powers is actually much bigger than the US economy. The only problem is they are disorganized, they are fractured. They are still buying and selling through the US because that's the infrastructure they built. But Mark Carney is aiming to change that. He wants to standardize regulations, labor code, and supply chains between the middle powers. He wants to create what he calls a concentric circle of trade. If he pulls that one off, and it's not all that impossible, we create an internal market massive enough to sustain its own growth without needing the US to buy our surplus. You see, it's about moving from survival to choice. We're also seeing this structural shift in global finance. The euro share in global currency use is rising. There is no doubt about that, no matter what Maple MAGA may say. Euro-dominated international issuance hit a record high of 1.5 trillion in 2025. Even US techs like Amazon and Alphabet are borrowing in euros instead of dollars. Now that tells you something, my friends. The smart money is already diversifying away from the US dollar. Here's another killer stat. Gold now exceeds US treasuries in central bank reserves. That's a huge vote of no confidence into the US dollar. So how do you actually bypass the US landmass? You don't do it with a Sharpie pen, I tell you that much. Canada is already aggressively investing in what maritime strategies call the three-ocean frontier infrastructure. We are building massive deep water ports on the Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic coast to physically route goods around the US landmass. Here's the lifeline to Europe, the Port of Halifax in Nova Scotia. It is the only Eastern Canadian port capable of handling the world's largest container ships. We're building up automated rail yards so goods can now move directly into central Canada without ever touching US soil. Then there is Port of St. John in New Brunswick. It's being transformed into a clean energy hub for liquefied hydrogen and critical minerals specifically for German and French industries. Now, this is the Asia route and Canada's secret weapon. The port of Prince Rupert in British Columbia. It is geographically up to 36 hours closer to Asia than any US port in California. A big effort is happening right now to double its container capacity so Indo-Pacific powers like Japan and Korea can get Canadian minerals via direct Canadian Northern Sea lanes. And the port of Churchill in Manitoba. It's Canada's only deepwater Arctic seaport connected to a major rail network. It's being upgraded right now for seasonal shipment directly to Europe and Asia through the Northwest Passage. A southern Canadian waterway that completely bypasses the US. The bottom line is, Canada is literally building a bypass around the US economy, the physical foundation to render the American landmass irrelevant to our Canadian trade. That's it. And this is not a pipe dream at all. History is loaded with examples of mid-tier nations successfully insulating themselves from a superpower. Let me give you 3 strong examples. First, the European Economic Community versus the US that happened between 1960 and 1970s. This was the predecessor of today's EU. After World War II, all of Europe was completely dependent on US aid. Then they signed a Treaty of Rome, built a unified international market and created a common agricultural policy to be autonomous and capable of feeding themselves. By the 1980s, they had evolved into an equal economic superpower and stopped being subordinates. Second, the Hanseatic League versus imperial monarchy happened in 14th, 15th century. A collection of merchant cities were squeezed by empires like Denmark. They banded together, standardized laws, built a mutual defense fleet, and if one empire raised tariffs, the entire league boycotted them. They became so self-sufficient that the empire had to beg them for fair trades. Third, the non-alignment movement and Asia. During the Cold War, Southeast Asia middle powers were forced to pick a side. They decided a zone of peace, freedom and neutrality. They diversified their economies and refused to host permanent military bases. Today, ASEAN is a juggernaut that chooses how to engage with Washington. The takeaway? When mid-tier nations stop competing against each other and pool their resources, they dissolve the superpower's maximum pressure advantage. Decoupling is a marathon, not a sprint. Economists emphasize that reducing Canada's US trade dependency from 70% to balanced 40% is a 10 to 15-year infrastructure project. It requires building massive new ports, laying transatlantic cables, and maintaining political census across multiple administrations. And that exactly will be Canada's biggest challenge. The impossible part isn't the economic math. The challenge is whether mid-tier democratic possesses the political stamina to endure the short-term economic pain Trump inflicted today, in order to win genuine economic freedom tomorrow. But as we've seen, the strategy is sound. The physical routes are being built. The historical precedent exists. And Carney, knowing what he is doing, is playing the long game. And once this infrastructure is built, the negotiation dynamic flips. Instead of Trump and the Trumps that might follow sitting in a position of ultimate power, the survival network achieves symmetric level. They no longer have to make concessions out of desperate fear. They can trade freely on their own terms using US only to a level that suits them. Alright folks, we've covered a lot of ground today. We have seen physical infrastructure, the ports, the roads, the bypasses. We've looked at the historical precedent, proof that middle powers can break free from superpower domination. We have seen Mark Carney's long game, a 15-year marathon to achieve genuine economic sovereignty. And here's the question that keeps me up at night, and it should keep you up too. What happens to all of this after Trump leaves the White House? Because the American conman, Donald Trump, is 80 years old. He is on his way out, one way or the other. But the forces that brought him to power, the financial interest, the political machinery, the ultra-wealthy donors who fused Trump and J.D. Vance together to secure the 2024 victory, they aren't going away. Their ultimate goal was never just Trump. It was to institutionalize Trumpism in America, continuing this playbook they gave him. They've already spent billions remarking the judiciary, stacking federal agencies and embedding loyalties on every level of government. They're building a machinery that runs long after Trump leaves the Oval Office. So here's the million-dollar question we will talk about in part 3 of this series. If or when the Republicans win the next election, what happens to the world? What happens to the trade war? What happens to Carney's grand plan? In tomorrow's final, I'm going to open the curtain to the what if, the nightmare scenario where the war of the middle powers become permanent American policy. I'll show you who the real puppet masters are, what they are building behind the scene, and whether Canada and Europe can survive a permanent hostile United States. This isn't speculation, folks. This is the playbook. The architect of Trump have been written for decades. You absolutely do not want to miss this conclusion. But here's today's question I would love you to answer in the comments. Do you think Trumpism survives Trump himself? Or does the movement die with him? Please drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't watched part 1 yet, please click the link that follows in just a second to catch up. Hit the like button, subscribe and turn on notifications, because part 3 drops tomorrow at the exact same time. Thanks for watching. I'm Wilfried Lemkula with Europe Curious, where we don't just repeat the daily headlines, but open the curtain so you can see for yourself what's really behind it. See you tomorrow.